So good evening. My name is Klaus von Zicklin, and I'm the President and CEO of Mount Carmel Health System. Thanks for being here tonight. We certainly, as all of you know, when Janet makes a call, there's really no way to say no. But we're really pleased to host it, and I know that those of you who didn't eat, there's still plenty of food out there till 7, but after 7, I told the security guards they can take it and distribute it throughout. So, I have a few marks that were prepared, but in the last week, I've been at a number of meetings around Columbus. I'm fortunate to be able to sit on a couple of boards, and one of the really kind of exciting things, I've been in Columbus now almost 6 years, and I've been on the United Way board, I think, for 4. And when I came on the board, United Way kind of moved toward the 9 bold goals, and I think initially it went through a lot of consternation, and certainly it was a new way of moving. But in the last, even I just made a notice this last week, I've been to 3 different non-for-profit meetings where the same messages were starting to be discussed. So I think, what's really exciting is that not only is, United Way taking the lead by created the 9 bold goals, but also we're starting to see the collaboration and the directedness that's starting to happen in Columbus by virtue of those 9 bold goals and the work that the United Way team is doing to help facilitate that coordination and direction that will certainly, benefit our community. And to that effect, clearly all of you who participate both with, the gift of giving, both with dollars and with your time and energy is helping lead in that direction. So with that, I also would tell you that, this is a big weekend for us, because tonight after we leave here, this room is going to be converted. We're going through a new computer conversion at all 5 of our hospitals, which is one of the largest conversions that have happened. So we've rented 500 hotel rooms in the city. We're bringing a lot of people in to help be physician buddies and nurse buddies for the first week and a half of the conversion, so that we can, certainly not miss a beat with our patient care. But it is one of those challenging times that, we knock on wood, cross our fingers that all things will go reasonably well. So, but tonight we're going to talk about poverty, and many of us are not, do not think of poverty as being a major concern for our vibrant metropolis, but it is. The Columbus Partnership, the region's organization of top CEOs, recently commissioned a benchmarking study that focused on how Columbus metropolitan area ranks in comparison to 15 similar cities, including Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Cleveland. The results were startling. Our region had the highest percentage of its population living in poverty, and the highest percentage of children living in families with no working parents. In fact, 30% of all children under the age of 6 in Franklin County now live below the federal poverty level. And it was clearly one of the meetings that Janet and I were at yesterday was with the Mid-Ohio Food Bank, and that was one of those discussions that say not only do you realize, really the realization of how many children in this community live in the poverty, but what happens to kids and their ability to study, their ability to educate when they're hungry all day, and how do we as a community deal with it? The partnership study shows Columbus also ranked at the bottom on a majority of other personal prosperity indicators. We are falling behind our peer cities in medium household income, persons receiving public assistance, home ownership rates, and home foreclosures. This all means that poverty is now a top concern for us in Central Ohio. It's not an issue that is isolated in our central city neighborhoods. It's found throughout Franklin County. More than 98,000 children are now eligible for free or reduced price meals. To be eligible for free lunch, children must live in homes earning less than $24,000 a year for a family of 3. For a reduced price lunch, the income number is $34,000 a year. In some Columbus schools, virtually all students are on the free or reduced lunch program. This is where we stand today. Tonight, we'll learn about poverty and what we can do to help reduce it. But first, the next person up obviously needs no introduction. And again, I'm grateful for what Janet does in this community to lead us and to drive these agendas. Janet Jackson.
sharing those startling statistics with us. I hope you were startled when you heard them. 30% of all children living in Franklin County living below the federal poverty level. I also want to say thank you, class, to you and to Mount Carmel for hosting and sponsoring Tocqueville's leadership. I'm not sure that 7 o'clock time period for the food disappearing. Most of us will probably want to go back when this is over. I'd also like to offer my sincere thanks to our other sponsors, to the Seymour Family Foundation, to Merrill Lynch, Porter Wright, to Giant Eagle. And thank you all for joining us for an evening of thought-provoking learning and discussion. As you know, tonight we'll be hearing from one of the nation's foremost experts on poverty. I'll be honest with you, for years, and I do mean years, I've been advised not to say the P word. Our research at United Way indicated that many people don't want to hear about poverty because it's too negative. They want to hear about opportunity. Well, poverty and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. Poverty exists where there is lack of opportunity. Lack of educational opportunity, lack of economic opportunity. It's an issue that stems from many factors, and it must be addressed in many different ways. We can and should focus on solutions, but we must begin by acknowledging the issue that we face. We can't be afraid to say the P word. The fact that we are #1 among comparable metropolitan areas in poverty, as Klaus shared, is and should be a wake-up call for all of us. It tells us we must step up the good work that we've been doing. It tells us that we have to strive even harder to achieve our bold goals in education, income, health, and home. It tells us that we must redouble our efforts to engage more people in our crucial work of improving lives and strengthening community. I know that with your strong support, we can accomplish all of those things. And I look forward tonight to learning more about the most effective ways to address poverty from our guest speaker this evening. And let me take this opportunity to thank all of you. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of you for your generosity, your engagement, and your energy. So now, I would like to introduce a woman who is a true champion of our community. Barbara Seymour and her husband Al are not only two of the most caring philanthropists in Central Ohio, but they're also two of the most well-educated when it comes to effective strategies for dealing with poverty. They've taken the time to learn about what works and what doesn't. And they are hands-on in applying their expertise. Just one example of this is the Seymour Institute for Family Stability, which was launched almost 1 year ago. The Institute supports programs that have truly helped thousands of hardworking families stay in their homes and keep their children in their schools. Please provide a warm welcome tonight to our wonderful, wonderful Barbara Seymour.
Undeserved, but awfully nice. This is a dream come true for me. About 4 years ago, that was in Skip the Library, took all of us to Linden Library, which was new at the time, and handed us all a book called Understanding Poverty, written by Ruby Payne. And I went home and thought, I understand poverty. I know what it is. I know it's people who don't have sufficient means to live, and if they generation. I thought I knew a lot because I have done a lot of work with people who need help and need resources. But this gave me a whole different understanding of what it means to be poor, and more importantly, the barriers to getting out of poverty. So I read that book and it became my Bible #1, the Old Testament, so to speak. And then, not too long after that, along came Bridges Out of Poverty. I understand it's an old edition, well, it's the one I have. And this was a way to establish the means for people in poverty to leave that life and enter a new life. And it too was revelatory. You don't quite know how to think about challenges that people in poverty face, and more importantly, the challenges and the complexity of getting out of that way of life. Philip's going to go into that, and I won't steal any thunder, I could anyway. But it's not an easy problem. It's not just like, well, get a job and everything's going to be fine. It isn't simple. It's complicated. It's cultural. It requires a lot of strength. It requires a lot of guts to get out of poverty, because you give up a lot as you get a lot. And that's what I think we need to understand, and hopefully Philip's going to lead us there. Philip is from Marengo. I don't know if you know where Marengo is. I spent 12 years in Marion, Ohio, so I did know. And the co-author of this book also lived in Marion, so very good people in a very good place. He's written a number of books, Beyond Bridges on Poverty, Bridges Out of Poverty, and has established a number of workshops to work with communities that are trying to find a solution and assistance for people who live there. I'm going to let him add, I'm sure, what he is more qualified to tell us about, but I can't tell you how helpful it has been for me to read these two books and to have a much deeper understanding of what it is to be poor, and more importantly, how do you stop living in poverty? How do you get the first step in the rung into the middle class? It's not easy, but fortunately, we have people like Philip who are able, very capably, to help us figure out what those steps mean and how we take them. So Philip, I'm so pleased to have you here.
I'd be remiss if I did not thank our host, Klaus, for having us here, and Janet for bringing this to us. You started us out on a good note. You talked about information and change, and Janet led us to poverty and opportunity, and Phil, you brought it home, giving us what we will reap if we listen and we do that. And now we have experts. So I'm going to change the script for the sake of time. I'm going to ask our 4 panelists to come up. I'm going to ask our audience to look at this beautiful brochure you have with their pictures and bios. But since they are here, I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of who they are, because they're all my friends. And so this makes it very easy. Plus, I have the microphone. So I'm going to start just as you sat down with you, Alex, my good friend. Alex Fisher, as you will see in your brochure, is the president and CEO of the Columbus Partnership, which is a civic organization of Columbus, Ohio, with its top business leaders. And in this group, they look at everything from economic development to the cultural base of Central Ohio. Alex also has served as a senior vice president for business and economic development for Patel. He has also, and Phil mentioned politics, he has also served as a deputy governor and a chief of staff to the governor of Tennessee, and a whole host of other things. He serves on a number of boards, including serving on the Nationwide Children's Hospital Board, Chamber of Commerce, Experience Columbus, and the list goes on and on. They are all well educated with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and he also has had the opportunity to be involved in many projects that have been to the tune of $14 billion or more. Join me in welcoming Alex to our panel. Paducah is the executive director of the Children's Defense Fund in Ohio. I've had the opportunity of watching her work. She is brilliant when you think of looking at public policy and taking her experience and the understanding of the importance of smart collaboratives. And she has a passion for making a difference in the lives of children. And we stole her. And I know Mary Wright Edelman would not mind if I said that. She was very pleased to have you join her as the executive director. She has had a long and very prosperous career. She has served as the deputy director for constituent affairs and policy at the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. She's also served as the chief policy analyst for former Governor Ted Strickland, and the list goes on and on. She also has her Juris Doctorate degree from Georgetown University Law Center, and she too has served on a number of boards. Next, if you look in your book, you will see my good friend Stephen. Stephen and I have something in common. He spent far more years than I at The Ohio State University. He comes to us as the Senior Executive Dean of the Fisher College of Business. He has also served as the Interim Dean for the Fisher. He has a long career there, I'm going to say of more than a couple of decades, and leave it at that, Stephen. But he has taught just about every class you would want your child to have been taught at Fisher, and you would want him to have been your professor in that. He also is well educated, having his bachelor's and master's, and earned a PhD in economics from George Washington University. He too serves on a number of boards, and he is well published with Phil, more than 5 books and more than 50 book chapters. We are pleased to have him. Next to him, last but not least, my good friend Anthony. And again, if you look in your booklet, you will find more about Anthony, who is the director of Franklin County's Department of Jobs and Family Services, which is, I believe, the largest agency in the county, and it has a budget of more than some $70 million. But money and large employers is not something new to Anthony, because he was also the director of Franklin County. He was the chief of staff there of the Department of Jobs and Family Services, with a $19 billion agency. As the other panelists here, he is well educated with a bachelor's and master's degree. He serves on a number of boards and has had a wealth of accomplishments. He also served, and I like this, and I don't think I knew this about you, Phil. He served about you, Anthony. He served as an intelligence analyst in the U.S. Air Force bases in Nebraska and Alaska. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Now, let me say to you what the ground rules are. We will have an initial question, and the initial question, we will allow each of you to give a very concise and brief response to it. Keep in mind many of the things that Phil has already shared with us. And we're going to start in the order that you are seated for this first question. And this question is, according to the latest benchmarking compiled by community research partners, along with the support of the Columbus Partnership and the Columbus Foundation, Columbus, as we have heard earlier, is the #1 in poverty amongst the cities in the report. Think about that. We heard that in #1. We heard about the foreclosures. We heard about in many of our schools, many of the children, if not all of them, are receiving a free or reduced lunch. So with that in mind, the question then is, what is the impact of that on our vision for Columbus's economic development? Alex.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks to all the organizers for being here. When we hear that stat, and it's been interesting, we've been before the Columbus Metropolitan Club, the Columbus Foundation, our own partnership, so there have been a lot of discussions over the last 6 months on this topic in the benchmarking report, and this stat as it relates to poverty. And the most interesting thing from my standpoint is, I keep asking the question, why is everybody surprised? Because it is the same staff that it was 2 years ago, and the same staff that it was 5 years ago, and the same staff that it was a decade ago. And the great news is we're having this set of community conversations. I think the challenge is, are we going to be acting surprised a decade from now when we're doing the benchmarking study? Joyce, I think it's critical to our economic future. We tried to lay out an economic development plan that, if you'll look at it, compared to many communities, it aspires to more than just simply job creation. It goes to the heart of per capita incomes and trying to understand the distribution of wealth in our community. But perhaps if I listen to Phil and this body of work, I would turn the question around and say, how does economic development fit into the picture of poverty? And the one hand, the quick answer might be to suggest that prosperity is the path out of poverty. And I think if any of us are listening and are studying Phil's work in the bridges out of poverty, there is no silver bullet. Economic prosperity isn't the silver bullet that might be the cliche to want to jump to. That these issues are inextricably linked, and economic prosperity is just yet one of many aspects that are going to help us build a better tomorrow, so that we're perhaps not having the conversation a decade from now.
Thank you. Brenda?
No, I think that's a great start, Alex. I think when businesses start thinking about getting on that prosperity path, and now that we're seeing some bright spots in the economy, maybe we can talk about this a little further, but Phil's presentation, thank you, highlighted a couple things that I think businesses would be really smart to talk about. And I think you highlighted one company, the plastics company, where they put in place company practices that would alleviate some of the problems that the workforce would have when they're struggling with issues like poverty. So I think those things can be tied. When we talk about economic development and company practices for their workforce, how we can get a better result for businesses.
Thank you. Steve?
I think I just echo what's already been said. I think, as has been said, you look at those statistics, and it is somewhat interesting that it seems to be getting so much play, given that it is a fairly similar story. I think, I guess I live a little bit in an ivory tower, and so I'm a little bit concerned in terms of not being too ivory towerish. But if you look at that list of 16 cities and so forth, and you start looking at the differences in poverty rates across those cities, it's not as if there's a lot of spread in a lot of those numbers. And one has to ask, is there anything here that is statistically significant in terms of the difference, or isn't it interesting that those 16 cities are more as similar as they are, as opposed to, in a sense, how different they are? For me, I think you look at those statistics, and the story is a pretty straightforward one, that poverty is a measure of cash income. That's the way we measure it in the United States. And so really what you have there is a story of differences in median household income across cities, which then leads you to questions about the economic infrastructure of those various cities, cost of living differences across those cities, and so forth and so on. And so I think that it really then becomes a study of differences in median household incomes as much as anything. And then I guess the last thing I'd say there too is I think another thing that's instructive behind that poverty rate is to take a measure of the poverty gap, or so how far away from being in or out of poverty are households in those various communities. And I think one cause for hope in terms of Columbus relative to those cities is that the poverty gap for Columbus is not as high as the poverty gap in many those cities that actually have lower poverty rates.
Thank you for that point. And Anthony, would you close us out?
Well, I guess I'm the one that does not live in Ivy Tower up here. I see poverty every day. And, you know, you talked, Alex, initially about the data has been the same over the last couple of years. And now we're talking about it as if it was new data. But I don't think we really wanted to talk about poverty. I think a lot of times as the poverty discussion comes up, many people want to drive around poverty and stay on 270 and go to the suburbs. But now poverty is continuing to creep up and is now creeping out to those suburban cities. And, you know, we really need to talk about it, really need to do something about it. From an economic development standpoint, I think we need the right mix of businesses here. You know, we've lost many plants that employ, you know, a lot of our lower skilled individuals, but yet they need a middle income salary in order to do some of the things that they need to do to raise their families and continue to get those families out of poverty. But when we lost Timken and several of the other businesses that were here that paid decent salaries, now we're down to some of the, you know, lower wage jobs for some of those lower skilled individuals. And that does not take them out of poverty. And so I believe we need to get a good mix, and we need to collaborate, you know, as organizations and for-profit government as to how we approach the discussion moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And now to the audience, we're going to ask each of the panelists one question, and we're going to ask them their opinion as it relates to the world you live in and as it relates to thinking about our topic. And in light of what we've heard to question number one, I would like to start with you, Renee. Think about what we have heard, and I'm going to ask the question and put it in the frame from what Alex said. Alex said, prosperity is the pathway out of poverty. So when you work with children every day, so when we think about what we've seen with the remarkable increases in the number of children in our schools who are economically disadvantaged, clearly poverty is hitting our children hard. You hear it when you go to the food banks, you hear it when you're in the classrooms, and you hear it from the United Way. Are these policies, or are there policies that you believe that are getting in the way of meeting our children's needs? And then if you could just, I'm going to tack this on, are there policies that are actually helping? If you can kind of take that and give us an answer to that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, did you know that last week in Georgia, there was a 6-year-old kindergartner girl that had a temper tantrum in her class. She knew she was arrested, and first she was taken to the principal's office, then she was arrested, and the police were called. I mean, the zero tolerance policies that are rampant across our country to solve minor issues with children, truancy, talking back to teachers, being late, are being resolved by our criminal justice system. I mean, this is a nightmare, and this is something that's definitely holding our children back, because we talk about kids getting on the path to the criminal justice system, and we call it at CDF the cradle to prison pipeline. And these kinds of policies are exacerbating this problem, because the kids immediately are labeled as problems, and then that goes back to the teachers and the community, and then they're not showing up to school, and their suspension rates are going up. And so the question is why are these in place, and should we have them in place? And around the country, they're changing. In Baltimore, in fact, they got rid of the zero tolerance policies, and the graduation rates have soared. They're in Denver. So I think these are things that we need to look at in Ohio. It disproportionately affects African American children, 3.5 times by the Department of Education. Says that African American children and Latino children are affected more often for school suspension for these minor infractions than their Caucasian peers. So policies like that definitely need to be rethought
Thank
Now,
you.
things that are working,
Okay.
I'd love to end on a positive note. The
There
things
you
that are
go.
working are the school lunch is a great example of 32 million kids across the nation receive a free and reduced lunch, which is fantastic because you can't think or be educated if you're hungry. Unfortunately, only about 1 in 9 are getting fed of those kids in the summer, so that's a real issue. We're on this sort of agrarian cycle for our education here where we take 3 months off. And so during those 3 months, even though many of us aren't farming anymore, we're still on this calendar. And so these kids, unfortunately, are not getting fed. And so then the question is, who in the community is stepping in to fill that need? Because I'm at the Children's Defense Fund, I'll give a plug for a program that we hold dear to our hearts, and Mrs. Edelman's talked about this at a national level, but also locally. We have a Freedom Schools program, which is a 6 to 8 week program where the kids are taught social action, love of reading, self-empowerment, but then also are getting fed breakfast, lunch, and snack to sort of bridge that gap where kids aren't getting fed. But that needs to happen in all areas. And we're reaching a lot of kids through CVF's program, but I know there's kids in Appalachia on the river right this summer who won't be fed. And so that's, there's a bright spot there, but there's much work to do.
Thank you, and that's very much in line with what you will read if you have not. What Field talks about how to address inequities, and he talks about those social disparities as it looks at where you live and because of race. So I think that was a great example. Steve, if we go to you, and your question will be, with the changing economic environment at the state level and nationally, how do you think Columbus and Central Ohio are positioned for creating the kind of workforce development that leads to substantial levels of employment?
The university professor in me speaks in 1 hour and 48 minutes segments, so I actually wrote down something to keep up.
Well, we're not going to give you quite
I
that
know.
much. We'll go to those seconds.
Yeah, I guess I think the first thing about in answering that question is I think we sometimes get overly focused on the challenges, and I think one of the important things about workforce development issues related to Central Ohio is I think we have far more going for us than we have against us. And if you just I jotted down 3 or 4 or 5 things that are going for us. Your question asked about the level of employment, but the level of employment in Franklin County is actually reasonably high compared to many metropolitan areas. The unemployment rate, interestingly, is relatively moderate in relative terms compared to the poverty rate. Got multiple providers of remedial and post-secondary education and training throughout the community. It's very much an education-focused community. We have what I think is just a well-positioned, responsive community college in Columbus State. It's a civic-minded community. The orientation of the top business leaders in this community, I think, is really remarkable. We look at what the Columbus Partnership has done and other entities related to revitalization. We've got the ethic of a Midwestern generosity, a help of others, a self-reliance kinds of values, but largely a recession-resistant economic mix in terms of the city. So I think there's an awful lot going for us. In terms of, I just wrote down 3 or 4 observations on the workforce development system in Central Ohio as I see it. And again, I'll be the first to recognize that I'm not on the ground dealing with it every day the way you are, or even Alex. So I defer to both of you and others in terms of these 2 or 3 observations. One is that I think the workforce development system in Central Ohio is full of well-intentioned parties, but as a system, it feels much more chaotic, less coordinated than in many locations. So in many cities, I think you can walk in, or somebody who lives in that city knows kind of who the lead entity is relative to things related to workforce development. I'm not sure in this community that we know, or the same person or agency or group of entities would be identified if you asked 100 people on the ground, random where the lead is. I think it might be 98 different places. I think part of that for Ohio, frankly, and this is just a footnote, goes back to the way we're organized governmentally in this state, like many states in the Midwest, where we have far too many county governments. 88 counties set by how far you can ride a horse in the course of a day. It would be much better if 88 were consolidated into 44 or into 22 or whatever. The duplication redundancies are tremendous. Second point, I have a sense, again, I may be wrong, that there's something of what I refer to as a missing middle in terms of the leadership, in terms of the Franklin County business community. I think we've got extraordinary leadership at the top in terms of the organizations that constitute the Columbus Partnership. It may be, in fact, that because they're so strong, it creates a vacuum beneath it, and that nobody, in a sense, less likely to rise to the occasion because there is such strong leadership in the top. So I think that's kind of an interesting question. And then the third thing two more things. Third thing I'd point to is that, I think one of, and it relates a bit to what you've said, I think one of the interesting things in this community is that there still isn't a lot of coordination between training providers and employer-identified specific, firm-specific needs. And part of that is that we are very much a service-based economy as opposed to a manufacturing-based economy. And so most of the critical skills in this community are general skills versus firm-specific skills. And it is extremely difficult and expensive to train for general skills versus firm-specific skills. Which leads me to the fourth point, is if you look at most of the funding sources through government for training, the Workforce Investment Act, WIA, and so forth and so on, the training dollars are so small that there's a natural tendency towards trying to spread the dollars as widely as you can. It leads then in terms of training to too much, in my view, too much focus on light forms of training versus heavier investments of training. And in a world where to be economically sufficient, a family has to have at least one breadwinner who has at least 2 years of post-secondary education, if not more. The kind of training we focus on is inconsistent with the needs of the community.
Thank you for that. And what a great segue into you from that. So when we think about workforce issues, we think about family needs, we think about food, and we think about shelter. So when you think about those things in Columbus and in central Ohio, what are we doing to bridge and to build those bridges out of poverty?
Well, I'll answer that question from a job and family services perspective, because I know there's lots of organizations doing lots of different things. And so from the Job and Family Services, or JFS perspective, most of our programs are not really set up to bridge you out of poverty. Most of our programs are more safety net programs, and we do have one particular program, which is the Welfare to Work program, to help bridge you out of poverty. And so, as I look at our food assistance program, there's lots of conversation in Congress and other places about, food assistance is kind of running rampant. We need to reduce the food assistance budget. There's fraud, and there's so on and so forth. Well, in 2011 alone, we serviced, approximately 2.5 million people in Franklin County alone. Now, there's lots of duplication in that count because we don't have 2.5 million people in Franklin County. So some of these folks are coming in and then they're coming out. They're coming in and they're coming out. But that's the amount of times that we actually authorize a person's benefit in 2011. And the average benefit, really, for an individual with no employment, no means of really taking care of themselves, for a family of 3 3, the max benefit is $526 a month. And that's in the food. And that breaks down to $5.80 per day for each member in that family. And so you may not see these individuals at Mitchell's and some of the other nice places because they're really just getting by. So this money is not really set to bridge you out of poverty, but it's really set as a safety net to hold the family together. Another benefit is our Medicaid benefit, which Medicaid really helps because medical bills are extremely expensive. And so with the Medicaid benefit for, these low-income families, and mainly serves the aged, blind, and disabled population, which really takes up a majority of the dollars. This is set where you won't fall deeper into poverty by paying the medical bills for those individuals that need it, and also coordinating, the medical home for those individuals where they'll get checkups, so they won't go to the emergency room as a last resort. We try to coordinate the health care of those individuals. And last year alone, we serviced, duplicated count, 2.9 million individuals walk through our doors back and forth, back and forth. Cash assistance, is another benefit in which cash assistance has changed. Back in 1996, under the Welfare to Work Act under President Clinton, you can no longer keep a welfare benefit for a lifetime. At the federal level, it's cut off at 5 years. In Ohio, you have a 3-year lifetime limit. And for a family of 3, it's at $450 a month. That doesn't bridge you out of poverty, $450 a month. Last year alone, we serviced over 375,000 families here in Franklin County. But the big thing with the Welfare to Work Act, in order to keep your benefits, one of the things that we're doing is providing job training, providing educational programs. Our big initiative is our work experience program, which means that in order to keep your benefits, you are required to participate X amount of hours per month. That X amount of hours, what we're doing is developing partnerships with the local business community in order to get these individuals valuable work experience in order for them to be self-sufficient, in order for them to actually be prepared for one of these jobs. So our goal, once we develop a work experience site, is that site, that business will actually hire those individuals. But if they don't, they will gain enough work experience in order to apply for other jobs that are available in the community. And so that is the program that we operate that we're hopeful will bridge, these individuals out of poverty.
Okay, so Alex, we're going to let you close this out, and I'm getting ready to ask Alex's question. I want everyone else to think about their last question, and that will be, what can we do as individuals to bridge us out of poverty? Alex, we're going to let you close this out because what we have now heard from those who represent public institutions, we've talked about how poverty impacts and affects our children. We've heard about how it affects the economy. We've heard about how through one of our largest organizations, how we basically sustain versus taking people in our public system out of poverty, but we sustain or hopefully put them in a position to be a little more self-reliant. So with that, you have been actively engaged throughout your career in public, but right now, with the Columbus Partnership, you would be what we call representing the private sector. So what are the kinds of bridges that should exist between our institutions and systems if we're really going to reduce poverty and if we're going to really continue to strengthen Ohio?
So I guess I would end where I started, that it all seems to be that it's inextricably linked. And, so if low birth rates matter, and investments in our children's hospital, where I happen to be the vice chair, so that's selfish, but if kids can't learn because they're hungry, then investments in the Children's Hunger Alliance and their summer programs that are going on matter. If worker training is going to make a difference, then the investments that we make in Columbus State Community College and Ohio State University and a lot of others matter. If economic prosperity is a piece of the puzzle, then our investments in economic development and Columbus 2020 program are important. If employment matters, then the thousands of jobs in the private sector, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the private sector is growing and building matters. And the point I would make through all of that is it's all inextricably linked. I mean, if there were an investment that the private sector could make to end poverty, I think everybody in this room would get their checkbooks out and make that investment tomorrow. And I think what Phil helps us to illustrate is it is not that simple. The link to the private sector is multidimensional, and I think we see it happening day in, day out. That Janet, runs one of the largest and most successful United Ways in any community in America. I think you add all of that up, and it says something very powerful about our community. I think what we all struggle with, though, is, well, why are we still at the bottom? And I tell you that I leave wanting to ponder the questions some more and continue to have the community dialogue, because I think that's the power of collaboration is going to be the power that helps us to figure it out.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful, and I think certainly Janet wanted us to be here not only to hear the wonderful presentation from Phil, to hear people who live and work in this in the public and the private sector, and I guess I would say to the audience, as we ask Phil to come up and join us so we can have a brief Q&A. I think you did link it for us. I think you took what we heard from our experts, and I think I say to you, the audience, well, I may not say it like Alex said, to pull out your checkbooks, but I think you make an investment in United Way. And what we're hearing is the track that Janet and her staff is on is a track to do non-traditional things. And she has been a forerunner of linking those things, the health, the education, advocating for communities with our children. So Janet, I say to you, we are hearing your work here. We are also giving you more work, but at least you have the track. And I think that is very atypical for a United Way. For a United Way to think outside of the box and to be this courageous and strategic to bring business folks together, to bring experts who represent our problems and our poverty and say, I am here to help fix it if you give me that link. So let me just say on a very personal note, most of you know I am going to Washington, and this will be very helpful. We're going to have a quick question and answer, but I asked you to think of, and I'm going to modify that because I'm getting this signal back here from Nancy. So you remember what that question was. I'm going to ask you to answer it in one word. What can we do, or one thing? And then we're going to take a question and answer. I'm going to let you figure out who in the audience you would like to allow me to ask that question. Okay, so Renee.
Get involved.
Get involved. Steve.
It's a compound sentence. Be better parents and help others to be the best parents they can be.
Anthony.
Public-private partnership.
Alex.
Collaboration.
Okay. There you have it. Question for us with Phil joining us. Nancy is telling me I can take one question. And I know we're going to have multiple questions, so let's see whose hand goes up first. Yes. Would you stand and ask your question?
Stand.
Everybody can see you and hear you.
And dance.
I do taxes for a living, and about 20 years ago, a tax lawyer had an article that says state-sponsored gaming, people who participate in state-sponsored gaming, they call it a tax on imbeciles. the people who make less than $10,000 a year spend 20% of it on state-sponsored gaming. That was 20 years ago. We now have a casino that's going to come in on the west side, and we have slots and a horse track on the south side. We're already where we are in the list, and that just concerns me, and I'm just kind of wondering, it's going to get a little bit harder, I think. You know, we've got a little more work to do. And Phil, I saw the thing that you had on that, but you know, some of this, you know, he just buy the lottery ticket and it'll solve all your problems mentality drives me crazy. So how do we address that? The people from Ohio voted for it, so we have to deal with it. But isn't it going to make things a little bit more difficult for us?
Phil, we're going to ask you to take a stab at that, and then we'll let one of the panelists take a stab.
I think that gambling plays a part in poverty the same way big screen TVs do. In the sense that when you want some relief, and you want some hope, and there isn't much hope, and things keep going and grinding along the way they are, you know, spending a couple dollars on a chance doesn't seem like a bad deal. And I think it's going to exacerbate the problem, as you say. It's going to make things worse if that sort of thing is more and more available to people. But I think people will go that route unless they have a place where they can sit and talk through it in a safe environment where they can actually analyze what's going on, because people just kind of react as they go along. We all do that. And I think the reaction to, you know, kind of hope for something, and, you know, spend a little couple dollars, what are you going to do with that money anyway? You know, so here's a couple bucks to put towards this, and you might make it. So that takes a lot of time to think and talk through things. And I think that comes up in the getting in conversations as people talk about that kind of thing, and you know how much it doesn't make sense. But telling people those sorts of things is what I call the righting reflex. The middle class has this righting reflex when they see someone doing something wrong, they want to tell them what's right. And the shortest way to do it is just tell them. And that's really ineffective. You know, so we keep doing stuff that's not effective. Hope it makes you feel good at night because you were right, but it's not effective. So we have to find effective ways of getting that idea across. Now that's just at the personal level. Maybe folks can talk about the institutional community level and policy level around gambling, but at the personal level, I think that's where that's at.
Any one of the panelists want to make a quick comment? Anthony?
I participate in a federal discussion on this because in other states, individuals are using their cash cards, their welfare cards, at gambling places and other places. And so not only their welfare cards, but also their food assistance cards were being used in these different locations. And so part of the discussion now is to write a rule that outlaws all of these different types of locations for any of the public benefit program cards, because no one gets cash anymore, everything is on a card. And so I'm hopeful that that will deter some of our individuals from going there. Like, we are really concerned about some of these new gambling locations.
And that's a good point. And to Phil's point, I think that's a little different, and I think we should have clear laws, because just as you could not take that food card and go and buy alcohol, no one's making the personal judgment that if I make $8,000 and you make $80,000, that you're going to tell me I shouldn't drink wine. But you should not be able to take a food or a medical card and use it for anything other than food. So great. And I think we take one question from this side. Anyone over here?
I sure will.
Sure.
My interest is mainly in the area of education, and I struggle all the time with trying to get kids to a third grade proficiency level, beyond which, if they don't achieve that, everything goes downhill. And so education seems to me the ultimate route, the ultimate bridge out of poverty. And the question has to come, how soon do we need to get our hands on children, and in what way do we educate them so that even though they may be living in poverty, that somehow we are giving them the tools to get out? Obviously, graduation rates are appalling in the inner cities. How do we, what are the words and what are the systems that we can put in place to help the children? That if the family is in poverty, how do we give them the aspiration to do something different without necessarily criticizing or making judgments on the environment in which they grow up.
Can I say something?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that there is a huge talent pool out there that is completely left out of the solutions, and that's the people in poverty. And we keep acting like they are the problem, and I'm arguing they are the solution. And if you say to parents, come and learn about the first 2 years of life, and what happened to the child's brain in those first 2 years. I know about this because we did it in Morrow County. We did 13 weekend programs aimed exactly at young parents who, if they just interact more with their children, use more words, and use what we call mediation with their kids, that they can prepare their young children, their cognitive pieces will be in place for learning. When parents know that, they become the teachers for the next group. So we did 13 of these weekends, and by the time we got to weekend number 8, we had replaced the 8 middle-class people that were running that, and it was being run by the former participants. The people who we think are the problem are where we should go for the solution. And they are dying to give back, and they want to do things. And if they get respect and that kind of thing, then they're going to be the solution.
Okay. Thank you so much. Please join me in giving them a round. I think this has been a wonderful panel. We have thanked them. I was also told to mention to you that Making Choices, the Making Choices game that is in each attendance bag, and we're asking you to take a look at it, to play it, to share it, because it is about the choices you make when spending your resources, and it's revealing to think about what those choices are. Please join me as I ask Janet Jackson to please return to the stage to bring closure to today's wonderful.
I can do it from here.
Okay.
Thanks to each of you for coming this evening and for staying. I know that the hour is late, but I think that the conversation has been thought-provoking, and we will not end tonight. Not sure of the next steps, but we'll be bringing you back together. Again, thank you to our fabulous moderator who is on her way to Washington, D.C., and to our fabulous panel, and to our speaker, and again, to Klaus for having us tonight. We want to continue to have these types of conversations. You are truly our most generous investors, in our work, and we appreciate the treasure that you bring, but we also want to keep you well informed, become our ambassadors as you go back out into our various communities, and to help us shape our work going forward. The very last piece that we just heard from our speaker about what you did in Morrow County, we may somehow try to incorporate into our very own Columbus Kids Ready, Set, Learn by getting parents more involved. So this is a path for all of us. I am not a Pollyanna person. As someone described me a couple weeks ago, I have not only passion around this issue of poverty, I'm pretty angry about it in many ways. But I do believe that in this community, we have the will, we have the desire, and we have the ability to make a difference. Thank you. Have a good evening.